This video is going to focus on the 10 main reasons that people are denied boarding on cruise ships. Hopefully with these tips, you can avoid running into this disastrous problem. Let's get started. Reason number 1, being late to port. A common mistake of cruisers is to misunderstand the time that you need to be at port. On your itinerary, you will typically see a departure time, say 4 o'clock, and think that they need to arrive by port to, if they're there by 3:45, it will be fine. It won't be. Most cruise ships require you to be on the ship anywhere from an hour to 2 hours before departure. So make sure when you are traveling to your port that you leave plenty of time to get there. This is especially a problem for people who choose to fly in on the day of the cruise. That is always a dangerous game to play because you never know if you're going to be stuck in some sort of airline problem or delay, especially with weather problems. So plan to fly in the night before and arrive to your port nice and early to avoid this very common problem that people have. Number 2, not having proper documentation. Every single cruise line in their paperwork will say the same thing. A passport is the best form of identification when going on a cruise. However, many people want to avoid that step and use the alternative, which is allowed on some itineraries. The alternative is to bring along your birth certificate as well as a photo ID. Again, this works on some itineraries, not all itineraries. And because some people make that mistake, it is a very common reason for people not to be allowed to board the ship. If you do decide to go the birth certificate route, make sure that you actually bring the physical copy of your birth certificate and not a photocopy, as that's not allowed. Additionally, you want to make sure that the name on your photo ID is exactly the same as your birth certificate. And if it's not, you will need to bring documentation to prove the change. This is really common for married women, so you may just want to bring along your marriage certificate and any other documents that would prove your name change between your birth certificate and your photo ID. Problem number 3, problems with your passport. While passports are the gold standard of identification, there are still a few things that if you don't do properly could get you denied boarding. The first one, your passport needs to have at least 6 months left before the expiration date. This is something that is required in certain ports, and so you want to make sure and double check that expiration date well before you travel. Secondly, especially if you're going on many overseas adventures, many countries require you have a certain number of blank pages in your passport, and they will deny boarding if that isn't the case. Finally, make sure you bring that passport with you. A very common problem that many people have is they leave their passport in their checked luggage. And just the way that ports work, it is almost impossible to get that out, and thus those people are denied boarding. Number 4, visas. Now, when traveling, many people don't think about this, but there are a ton of laws that limit when certain groups of people can enter certain countries, and it is usually based upon your citizenship status. It is important, and it is your responsibility to check out your visa status before you travel. In fact, this is something you should do long before you travel, as applying for visas in certain countries can take many, many months. If you're unsure about your status and if a visa is required, it's a really good idea to do some online research. Look at the websites of the countries you plan to travel to, as well as the country that you have citizenship in, just to see what may be required. Their websites are much more reliable than the cruise lines, and double checking is always a good plan. Our 5th reason for being denied boarding is not having parental consent when traveling with minors. It is really amazing to travel with large family groups, and some people like to bring along children from other families, whether it be cousins or friends, just to enhance the experience. The reality is, if you are traveling with a kid that's not yours, you need some paperwork just to ensure a smooth voyage. Firstly, you need written permission, usually notarized, from the parents of the child that you are going to be traveling with. This is something that many countries have put into place as laws simply to try to cut down on human trafficking. So, good goals. Next, if you are traveling with only one parent and the other parent isn't with, you may need to bring along some custody paperwork or a note from that other parent explaining why the other parent isn't there. If the child has a different last name than you, you also may want notarized paperwork showing the reason for the discrepancy. Again, just in case. Our sixth reason that people are denied boarding on cruise ships is either they are pregnant or they have very small babies. Now, everyone wants to travel with a family, but unfortunately, cruise ships just aren't medically equipped to deal with potential problems that can happen late in a pregnancy. Thus, all the major cruise lines, including MSC, Carnival, and Royal Caribbean, prohibit women who are in advanced stages of pregnancy from traveling on cruises. Most of them define advanced stages as being anything from the 23rd to the 24th week of pregnancy. Some cruise lines even require you to have a note from your doctor saying how far along you are in your pregnancy and giving you permission to travel. If you don't have this documentation, they may not allow you to board the ship. Additionally, many cruise ships also have a minimum age for travel, saying that babies need to be anywhere from 6 months to a year, again, depending on the cruise line and the itinerary, because they just, again, don't have the capability of dealing with potential medical problems that little ones can have. Double check your cruise lines before you go. Our seventh reason that people are denied boarding is because, unfortunately, they're sick. Nobody wants to get sick and miss their vacation, especially one that's been planned anywhere from 6 months to a year in advance. But the reality is, things happen. Many cruise lines continue to give out health questionnaires, asking you to fill it out, usually a day in advance, your current health status. For example, do you have a fever, sore throat, those kind of things. If you do say yes, they may have you report to the medical personnel to see if they are going to allow you to board. However, they may deny boarding even if you appear to be ill when you are going through the check-in process. So that's something to keep in mind. I know it's tempting to lie and say you're fine when you're not, but the reality is most cruise ships are anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 people in a very small space, and we don't want to spread illnesses needlessly. So try to be honest when you're doing this, even though it may end up with you being denied boarding. Here's where trip insurance can be helpful, because most trip insurance policies will allow you to get a refund on the price of your trip if you have an illness that prevents you from traveling. So check into that. Number 8, having a criminal background. A lot of people don't know this, but many of the major cruise lines, including Carnival and Royal Caribbean, do background checks on the people who book cruises on their line. And one of the things that they are looking for is your criminal record. People who have been convicted of certain crimes, especially violent ones like assault or robbery, are going to have their reservations canceled. Both cruise lines say they do this well in advance, so it's unlikely you'll actually be stopped at the port, but it is something to know if you are planning to travel and you have a criminal background. Additionally, many countries will not allow people with certain criminal records to enter their country. 2 of them include Mexico and Canada. Canada is especially restrictive. They don't even let you come into the country if you have been convicted of a DWI. Now, there is ways that you can get some of your crimes forgiven by Canada, but that process is really long, and you have got to start it well in advance of even booking your cruise. It's also important to know that saying that you'll just stay on the ship is not an option in many of these countries, because they will not even permit people with criminal records to even enter their territorial waters. Again, Canada is the most restrictive on this. So if you're looking at an Alaskan itinerary, for example, you really need to check this stuff out well in advance of your trip. Lastly, it's important to know that many countries, including the United States, will check ship manifests to see if there's a warrant out for your arrest. and no one wants to come back from their vacation and leave the port in handcuffs. So keep that in mind as well. So here we are at number 9, prohibited items. Now, to be honest with you, if you bring the vast majority of things that are on the prohibited items list, the cruise line is not going to deny you boarding. Instead, they will just confiscate those items and return them to you at the end of the cruise. No real big deal. And if you want to know what are prohibited items, go to your actual cruise line's website and they will have a very detailed list of things you cannot bring on the ship. However, there are a handful of items that if you bring them on, you are not going to be allowed to board. And they mostly fall into the category of drugs and weapons. Certain weapons, including knives, might get you removed from the ship. In terms of drugs, there have been a number of passengers who have been denied boarding and in fact had the police called on them for trying to bring on illicit drugs, including CBD and THC. It doesn't matter if those items are legal in the state that you're from. They cannot be brought on cruise ships, and bringing them aboard could get you denied boarding and maybe even worse. Well, we've made it. Number 10. And the 10th reason that people are often denied admission onto the cruise ships is safety reasons. Now, this can entail a whole variety of things, such as showing up to the port intoxicated, potentially behaving badly during the security process. Those kind of things, which you do have control over, are things that sometimes the cruise lines just frankly don't want to deal with. If you're going to be intoxicated and rude with the staff in the beginning, there is no real hope that you're going to have a good experience the rest of the way. And so they will deny your boarding. When you show up at the port, kind of think like you're going to get on an airplane or go through TSA. Just do as you're asked to do. Try not to cause any problems, and it should be a pretty smooth situation. Well, there we have it. Some of the major reasons people are denied admission onto the cruise ship. It sounds really scary, but the really good thing I hope you take from this list is the vast majority of these things are avoidable. Have you been denied admission onto a cruise ship for a reason we haven't mentioned? Leave a comment down below and tell us your story. Looking for more tips to be prepared for your next cruise? Check out this video here. Thanks for watching and happy cruising!